Welcome to Muslims Doing Things, a podcast about extraordinary Muslims and their career journey. Today we have Sada Ahmed. Sada, what do you do?
Thank you so much for having me here. I am a psychotherapist.
And I mean, you are like this new special brand of psychotherapist, which is like a social media famous psychotherapist.
Well, it's funny how it's really taken a turn, and I think it really skyrocketed during the pandemic, during COVID. And I think there's many of us who've been around for so long, and I think when we started targeting into different avenues, it was just like, whoa, what is this? But the reality is there's so many of us who've been there, and there's so many of us who are still there. It's just we don't have this online presence. So I am very lucky and blessed that I do have this online presence. And the idea behind it really was to just break the stigma as much as we can. There's so much work obviously that needs to be done, but that was the idea behind it, to be able to break the stigma, to be able to provide free resources, to be able to like let people know, like, hey, there are people who look like you who are out there that kind of do what they're doing, which ties into the work that I'm doing as a psychotherapist.
It's interesting too, right? Because we kind of have been raised in this era of content creation becoming an industry, right? And so there's two ways to go about it. Like either people are intrigued by you, they just think you're interesting for every reason or no reason. And they're like, cool, like I like the way that Sada lives and I'm just going to eat the food she eats and, wear the clothes she wears because she's interesting and like I want to emulate her. Then there's this other brand where it's like, no, I'm not sure I'd consider myself a content creator. I'm a psychotherapist with a platform, right? Like I have a core competency and I'm using the platform to amplify my core competency. And on the podcast, I find that like I'm not always, but often talking to one of the two. And it's interesting to see how the platforms are being used to kind of amplify these messages or create a living or not, right? Depending on kind of like what the person's goal is.
Yeah, I'm definitely the latter, I will say. And I think a lot of brands do reach out because they want to collaborate and stuff. And, if you take a look at how many brand collaborations I've had, you can count them on one hand, because I do consider myself to be the latter, not the former.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's an interesting differentiation. I don't necessarily think it's a differentiation people realize when they're consuming information, right? Because there's always a lot of drama, for example, about wellness influencers who are really just 19-year-old girls who have good bodies. And they're like, drink this pineapple juice. And you're like, okay, honey, but like, really? Are you sure you have the credentials to make that suggestion?
I know. My beef is not so much even with the young ones. It's okay. Like they don't know when they're in the process of getting to know. It's really the ones who don't know nothing from nowhere, and they're like, use this medication and use this like herbal pill and tincture and this and that. And I was like, where did you come out from, and from what are you talking about? You advertise yourself as a life coach, but really, like, what is evidence based over here? That's the thing that really, I will say irks me, because it's just like you can misguide people, and you have a platform, it's powerful, but you have to be very intentional about the work that you're doing over there, and unfortunately, I mean, this is not news. Unfortunately, celebrities also do this a lot. I think the latest one is just, the weight loss with Ozempic, except nobody's calling it the fact that it's Ozempic. It's just like, yeah, I love, eating healthy and hiking. And it's like, girl, come on. It's not
Yeah.
just eating healthy and hiking. We all know this.
Right. And I think that differentiation is crucial, and I'm glad we spent some time on it, because I think, again, as people who are consuming this podcast, if you consume this podcast, you likely consume something that is like user generated, right? I'm not an industry. I'm not like a career coach or a mentor. Like you've found me somewhere on the internet and you consume this, and so I think it's important. But that said, where are you based out of? Tell me, like, where did you start and where are you based? Fill me in.
So simple answer over there. I started in Toronto. I'm still based out of Toronto. However, right now what we're doing is we're working on a new project. So I've been practicing psychotherapy for, over a decade now. And the transition kind of happened where when I found myself in situations, just like everybody else, got into this, like, doe-eyed, I'm going to change everything that's going on over here. And then, reality hits you and you're just like, oh God, what did I get myself into? So I saw within community centers, within hospital settings, within academia, what was happening was there was such a like lack of diversity. I know someone's ears are going to fall off the one more time to hear someone say this. But really, in this line of work, you look around, there's not a lot of people who look like you. And then being a hyper visible Muslim, forget it. So I would, often find myself in a situation where I'm like, I think I check off like so many boxes over here, which is great for me. I love it. I'm not going to say no, but that doesn't identify, highlight, or address the problem at hand. So then I started transitioning to like, okay, how long am I going to complain about this, and when am I going to do something about it? So then, it started over here with like an individual. It was just me, and starting my private practice just to be able to provide services on a very part-time basis to local Toronto GTA Muslim community, Greater Toronto area. Excuse me. And then as I saw, like, once I put that out there, as I saw how the demand grew and like just word of mouth, and, really nothing was spent in marketing or advertising, nothing had happened. But like just such a gap that was there, and the dire need for that gap to be fulfilled, transitioned to creating a group practice. And that was called Wellnest. And, it was very much based in Ontario, in Toronto. So the beauty of, we had an in-person office in downtown Toronto. So the beauty of the pandemic was really, it opened up a lot of organizations to be able to operate virtually. And that kind of made it a little bit untapped, instead of having a physical space where X amount of people can only operate at a certain time. So now we're moving out of Toronto, and we're working on a bigger project called Lena. I've left Wellnest. I'm working on Lena, and Lena is going to be a nationwide mental health platform specifically for folks who can access services that have not been accessible before, whether that is physical location, whether that is somebody who looks like them or someone they can relate to, just relatability, accessibility. It's so big, and it wasn't there. And, it's always been there. It's just something that hasn't been addressed. Like, I was watching Sopranos yesterday, out of nowhere. I remember Tony Soprano had said to one of his friends, he said, listen, I know a shrink and she's Italian. What does that mean? That means, again, like, you can relate to her. Go see
Mm.
her. I see her. And it was important for him when he did pick his therapist, right? Like, she's Italian, so she gets it. And that piece of like, I just want someone who gets it, is missing substantially. And so all of that to say, I'm based in Toronto. We are operating out of Canada, though. Me, I will always be in Toronto.
I cannot wait to get into it. And were you born in Toronto?
No, I wasn't. So I was born in Saudi Arabia, and then I moved to Toronto, or I moved to Canada when I was, it was actually a month before 9/11. It
Of course. There's always like, I would say like 99%,
was
maybe 95% of this
crazy.
podcast, like that's like a moment. So tell me about that. You moved here for what? Your parents' work, I'm
So
assuming, because you
yeah,
must have been
my
pretty young.
teacher, I'm the youngest out of three. So my siblings had to go to university. So the idea was, when you're in Saudi Arabia, you either go back home. So home is India for my parents and me, of course, or we come here. And my aunt was already here. So back then, back in 2001, my aunt, like, my father figured out, how to get over here. And then, like, I will say the usual standard average, like, immigrant struggle story. It's the one that I've lived through, which comes with its, like, pros and cons. And the one thing that I will say is, like, that adversity really sets you up to know how to grind. I'll tell you that.
I mean, like in so many ways, right? On the identity front, on the monetary front, in so many ways. And so you move here, and within the immigrant story, your parents are probably picking up the pieces, trying to figure out what does it mean to make a life, figuring out how to apply to college for your siblings. And you say 9/11 hits, and so I mean, what was that like, and what was your experience after that?
For me, it was quite interesting because what happened was, and I don't think I've ever shared this on a public forum. So, what happened was, our immigration lawyer kind of screwed up a couple of things in terms of our paperwork. So, my siblings were here, and we were supposed to be immigrants at the time, landed immigrants, but because he screwed it up, I couldn't get into school anywhere, because back then you needed to be a landed immigrant. No kid could just go to school. And so when you can't go to school, I kind of stayed home. So I will say I was sheltered, I guess, in a way, from the realities of what was happening to Muslims or people of color during that time. um, and so when I did transition, I was able to get into school, I think a month before school ended. So school ends when? June? I think I got in like end of April, May. And even with that too, it was an interesting story because when you do that admission exam, what happens is, based off of your grades, I guess they put you in those grades. So I was put in grade 11, even though I was supposed to be in grade 9. And then again, it was such a mismatch, because I was like, well, I'm kind of here. School's ending in a month. But like, none of the grade 11 kids want to be friends with me, because like, I'm this like 14-year-old kid, or 13. Actually, no, I think I was even younger. I was like 13, I think. And all of that to say, I was sheltered. That's the short answer to the question. And as I got older, I did see the impacts of it in the communities around me, just how people were treated, just hearing stories. But I was very blessed to not have any direct impact.
And you're in high school at that point.
Yeah.
You graduate, and did you know you wanted to go into psychotherapy?
No, like every other brown kid, my parents were like, well, it looks like this one's going to be a doctor. So my brother and my sister both were in engineering programs. So I was like, okay, cool. Like the only other profession that's left for me is to be a doctor. And, I started like that was my trajectory. And I was like, yeah, cool. Why not? Let's give it a shot. And so I started kind of looking into it, started preparing myself for it, get to university, and I was like, I think I hate it. I just think I hate it. And something in my gut, I just knew. And I will say I've always been a child who was so attuned to like gut instincts. God put that in my head from a very young age, I will say. So I was like, I just know in my gut it's not going to work out. I just know it in my gut it's not going to work out. So I had my options open, but also the transition from high school to university was a bit of a challenging one for me. So my grades weren't so great. And so it took me a little bit of time to recalibrate. And, I share my grades often on social media. And I think that was one of like the most loved on posts that they saw my grades and they were like, wow, it's so helpful and validating to see, where you started and that there is so much hope out there for somebody who has grades like you to starting out. Because if you were to look at my grades, there is no way would have guessed like this person's going to get into grad school on like a double scholarship and like grants and stuff. Impossible. And so it took me longer to finish university. I came back for a fifth year. That also was it wasn't a new thing. I mean, a lot of folks were doing it. But the thing that was actually not so uh, normal, quote unquote, was landing on your specialization, your majors. I didn't get into it up until like my third year, second semester. Most folks at that point are getting ready to like graduate next year. I'm just like getting in at that point. And so, that's when I finalized psychology because I really, really liked it. And frankly, my first psychology course, I didn't really think about it. My cousin said, listen, I've heard it's like pretty good, easy course, take it. And I was like, okay, cool, let's give it a shot. Totally didn't do well, got a 60 something, probably got a C minus. But I just really liked it. And again, like going with that gut, I just was like, yeah, let me explore what's over here because I do genuinely enjoy it, even though my grades are not good. But heck, they're actually not good at anything. So might as well go with the trajectory that's actually working. Go with the one where you're enjoying it. If you're going down, might as well go down enjoying something.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And so like and in Canada, is it the same as the United States where you get your undergrad and then you get a master's degree or, some sort of
Yeah,
qualification?
yeah. So
So
you
you figure out a psychology and did you go straight to grad school from there?
So I didn't get in. I was waitlisted and I was working as well at the time. So I was lucky enough I got a job. And so I went in the following year. So I had a year break.
With clarity, like I'm gonna do psychotherapy, and did you know if you wanted to do marriage family therapy or a child? Like,
So,
had you figured it out?
you know what's interesting? I actually didn't even think about psychotherapy for a while. I had looked into so my master's degree is from social work. I got my master's in social work from the University of Toronto, and I just really liked it. Like just all the fluff that they had added to that program back then. I was like, yeah, it sounds great. And just providing support to communities. I always thought I would be doing community work and like very hands-on frontline. I never thought of individual psychotherapy. And then I also saw like I kind of did some reverse engineering and having a lot of conversations with folks. I remember seeing people on LinkedIn and I was like, oh well, they've gone into like administration work at hospitals. So I was like, there's a lot of versatility that comes from this program, so let me give it a go. Again, all of it was, or a lot of it was from gut. Like I was like, yeah, it just feels right. So I'm going to go with it. And I will say a lot of my business decisions, when I say a lot, I mean like 99.9% business decisions are also based off of my gut. Um,
Yeah.
and so based off of my gut, I went into it and then I started working on it. And again, like psychotherapy, when I graduated, no way. Like I was just doing, again, community work that I had thought of. So I was working in shelters. I was working at a residential care facility. I was doing things that I never thought I'd be doing after getting a grad degree. I remember my first job. I remember I woke up. I had to wake up very early, 4 a.m., get to work at 6 a.m., and I had to make bacon and eggs for breakfast for everybody staying at the residential care facility. So, there's things that I thought I would never do, and I did them. And I was like, did I really go to grad school for this? It's not adding up. And again, at the same time, I knew like this is how you set yourself up. You really have to scrape and start at the bottom. And And, I will say that is 100% the reason why I'm very comfortable and confident in my clinical skills at this point in time, because of all the work I put myself in positions, and I was like, I'm just going to welcome it. I didn't push back. I didn't fight it, because I was like, in my gut, I knew this is what needs to happen to get to a place where you're very comfortable, because nobody just starts off with an unrealistic goal of, well, you finish, you're 23 and you're just going to make it, you're going to make bank and you're going to have a director position. I was like, frankly, I don't even want it. If somebody offered it to me, I don't think I'm ready for it. So I think
It's interesting because I actually think that
that's
you you having that moment of clarity reflects a self-awareness that is not common. I think that because of what we spoke about earlier in terms of people obviously showing their best selves on social media across every age platform, and you do have very young people who are making a lot of money, being able to advertise certain products. Like, I think there's generally an expectation of like, I'm going to graduate, I'm going to be valued, and I'm figure it out. And it's certainly the long road. I too have taken the long road, so I feel that.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. And there is beauty in it. There really is beauty in it. The delay and the pauses and the reflection that comes with it, it's more meaningful, I find, and there's a lot of depth to it as well. And I find that same formula applies to relationships, whether it's romantic, whether it's friendships, whether it's work relationships, relationship with yourself. So I very much admire folks who take the longer route, even though it's slower. It is the one that I find is most cherished at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I totally can understand that. And so you graduated and you're making bacon and eggs and you finished that. And did you just go into private practice
No,
directly?
I didn't. It took me, what's funny is I got to a point at the hospitals and I found myself, irrespective of what the job was, Layla, I was like, I'm bored. After a certain point, I would get bored very quickly. So then I realized I can't stay in one of these jobs that are so rigid with so much red tape around, because I plateau my skills over there so quickly that I get bored. And then when I'm bored, really the things I was doing is just like spending money on things I didn't need to and just
Mm.
shopping for things again. Like it was just, I was like, no, I feel like my brain is dying bit by bit, bit by bit. So then when I started working at a hospital, I just saw, like, I kind of understood how things were going, and like things were said a certain way, but like I kind of understood what they actually meant. So, things like, well, in March, like it was like, oh, we're throwing a party. And I was like, it's not a party. It's because you guys got, you had to spend X dollars before you filed
Mm.
your tax returns. And I was like, you guys don't fall for this. Like, no, no, no. They don't care. Like, it's not a party. So I kind of started understanding like the behind the scenes process. And I just found I would plateau very quickly in certain jobs. And I was like, I'm just not stimulated. So again, like a part of my, like it's stimulation and my gut instincts. Those are the two main drivers, I will say, that take me places. I will tell you, based off of that too, today where I am, 6 months from today, I'll be again in a very different place, because I know,
Right.
it's like I think I need more stimulation somewhere. And so I didn't get into psychotherapy. Matter of fact, I didn't even think about it. I just remember, being called upon at the hospital. It's the only psychiatric hospital where I was working in Canada, actually, called CAMH. And I would be called upon because I was a person of color, because I looked like a hypervisible minority, because again, wearing hijab, I was the only person actually, I think, on my entire street that looked like me. So you could spot me outside when I was leaving the building, just on the street very quickly. And I was like, hold on, like they asked me to come into things, to sit on things, but also at the same time, it's not even appropriate. It's just also not inappropriate, but it's like there's no need for me here.
Like, you're not owning the case, you're just
Yeah,
there.
it's just like, oh, you want to just show like, hey, listen, be comfortable. We understand where you're coming from.
Yeah.
There's Sarah sitting in the room. And I was like, oh, hey,
She's just like you.
I was like, I don't think my skills are needed over here. I think I'm just like a placeholder. So then I started thinking, well, listen, if it's happening in the hospital, I can only imagine how much more it's happening outside of the hospital. And so that's when I kind of just started dabbling into like, maybe I should actually set up something just for myself so people can access me. And that's kind of how it started, after like just having all these doors closed. Before I even set up my private practice, I was just at my wits' end. So I had decided I'm just going to leave my job. It was a very cushy job. It was, we call it the golden cage. So you've got the golden handcuffs and you're imprisoned in, because the pay is great, the pension is great. And so you're just like, where else do I go? Even though I don't like the work, I'm not going to get this level of pension or the pay or the vacation and the benefits. And so I was like, you know what? I don't care at this point. It's okay. I'm happy working at like the McDonald's in my building, if I need to, but I'll figure something out. I don't want to be here. So I actually had made a plan to leave, and I had said January I'm gonna quit and kind of start my own thing, or I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'll figure something out. But really, I was at the end of my career trajectory there, being like, this is not the right role for me. I'm so bored so quickly over the last 8 years, 9 years. I get so bored. I don't want to do this anymore. Maybe I picked the wrong profession. Maybe I should look into a different grad program. Like that's where I was, because everywhere I went, I was like, I'm bored. I'm bored. I picked
Yep.
picked up on things quickly. I'm bored. Only to find out this is what I was, in my bones, I could say with full confidence, with a proud chest, I was made for this. It was just I was in the wrong place. Well, I wouldn't say the wrong place. I was at places where I was learning skills, and it's just those I plateaued those, or I saturated those spaces pretty quickly, only to find out, okay, now I'm in a different place, and this is the optimal environment for me. And
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important. No, it's important. It's important to know. Like, I think that when often, especially when people are new to a career or a space, their access and understanding of the space is limited on two fronts. One, like, what does the job actually mean and how many ways can you pursue this job? But two, also, like, management and workplace matter. And you don't realize that when you're fresh out of a program. You don't realize that, just based on the people who surround you and the way that the system is set up,
yeah,
either you can have a great experience, an experience that works for you, or you won't. Right. And I think that people then take their feelings personally and they start to believe maybe it's a reflection of them, when in reality, like, no, there's a much bigger world around you. And so you're doing your private practice. When was this, by the way? When did you start private?
this is back in 2018. Yeah, I was going to quit
2018.
my job, and I just kind of opened
Yeah.
up something like, you know
Yeah.
my father-in-law at the time, I remember he had a space that he was renting and he wasn't using it, so I was like, cool, I'll use it.
I'll take it. Yeah, I'll take it. And you're seeing people. How long were you seeing people on your own before you?
Went into a group
Yeah.
practice. So
Yeah.
I was seeing people on my own, honestly, not long. I think it was maybe 6 months or so. And then we brought on one clinician, or I brought on one clinician who's still with us. And I'm so happy to say that. And then April 2019 started making plans for expansion. And then we went from a one party to two, or a two party to very quickly a party of, or a group of, I think at that, I want to say 9 or 10.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And did your responsibility shift from like a clinician to a group owner to, like, you started creating content, trying to
Yeah.
scale your skills? What changed for you?
So I didn't create any content, because you know what? I actually have zero business skills. And if you've ever seen the post I did on my academia in first year, I got like a 51 in calculus. So like I had zero trust in myself when it comes to running the numbers or accounting. So a lot of my time was invested in just learning how to run a business. And all my investments that I made were just free. I just went on YouTube, I went on Google, I just learned everything off of Wikipedia and Google and YouTube. So I was juggling between that, plus running my private practice, plus working a full time job at the hospital. So I started really creating content, I want to say maybe a year and a half ago. I would say December 2021 or 2020. I can't remember. But not too long ago. I would say a year and a half ago, or about 2 years ago, approximately. But prior to that, like all through 2019, through 2020 as well, for the most of it, it was just really like figuring out, how do you run this thing? How do you keep this thing alive?
Right.
And what are all the hats that you're wearing, let alone how to like optimize and operate, yourself wearing those hats.
Yeah. Yeah. And like performance manage and all sorts of things. And
Yeah.
so, um, did you find that most of your clientele was minority, or are you only trying to attract minorities?
So I think just by way of what I look like, that
Yeah,
kind of
people
did the work for me.
people will be attracted to
Yeah.
you or not.
Exactly. So it was just like, okay, cool. She looks a certain way. Let's hit her up and ask her a couple questions, do a phone consult, see how that goes. So I would say, just because of how I look, and what people see when they first land on a website, big, like right off the bat, it was a big focus and emphasis on BIPOC communities.
And from there, you're kind of doing this job, trying to figure out how to scale a business. And when you and I first engaged, I don't know how long it was ago, 3, 4, 6 months ago, I was like, hey, you seem cool. You should get on my podcast. You're like, I'm launching another business. So talk to me about the transition from business one to business two and why. And again, like, how does your role change relative to these realities?
Yeah, great question. So the way it works is if I could, I would be a business one. I wouldn't have to, I wouldn't change a lot of things. But world is not perfect. And, I think we all know that the things you want are the things you don't get. So I had to transition to business too because we're looking to go from coast to coast now in Canada. It's no longer just, a Toronto based thing. And initially when we started, it was like specific Toronto based, and we used to cater to the Toronto community and GTA community. So folks would come in on the weekends who didn't live downtown. Most of our clients came up, they worked downtown and they would just walk up to our office downtown. So because of the transition came a whole bunch of other hats that I had to learn to wear, which is what are the, college bylaws in all the provinces? What are the rules and regulations? First of all, what are all the colleges? Because you might have heard like there's a psychologist, there's a psychotherapist, there's a social worker, there's a registered, clinical counselor, there's a registered clinical social worker. So there's a whole bunch of terms. And
And you like, before you kind of go into that, what does Lena do? So I understand the relationship,
yeah,
all those
sure.
people to Lena.
Yeah. So Lena is a nationwide platform, and it's very focused or heavily focused on BIPOC mental health. Now, when I say that, I don't specifically mean BIPOC mental health. Really, it's the diversity of the community that's there. So, for example, an Ontario community is going to be much more colorful compared to the community in Nova Scotia. So the idea is that it's not just for BIPOC folks, but really it's reflective of the diversity that you see in that community. So I can tell right off the bat, in terms of, let's say, white clinicians, we're probably going to have more white clinicians in Nova Scotia than we would in Ontario or even Toronto, for example, right? So that's just what it is. We want to be able to reflect what you see on the outside, inside, because
Mhm.
that is the main thing. It was not happening because the clinics on the inside were very white. Everything else around was not.
Right, right, right.
It was a huge.
Right. So you're saying that you were figuring out all the colleges now that we're seeing in context. So you're in Nova Scotia, for example, and you want to provide this service, and you're like, wait, shoot, what am I even selling? Like,
Yeah,
there's, psychotherapy and social work and yada, yada, yada.
yeah.
And off the bat, did you know you wanted to do all of them? Or did you look into them and say, I'm going to do these three
Yeah,
things?
because no, it was all of them because essentially all of them provide the same thing, which is mental health services. So what you have to do then is you have to look at like, all right, what's the need over there? Then you get into like outside of the people part and you get into the marketing side, which is like, what are insurance coverages? What are the college
Mm-hmm.
coverages? Because
Mm-hmm.
if you're going to be getting a lot of students who are going to be accessing services from you, what's your insurance coverage looking like? How do they
Mm.
reimburse themselves? Because you know what? Students don't have, 100 even $100 just lying around or $200 a month lying around. They don't. So reimbursements for them are very important. Another thing also is like accessibility, financial accessibility for BIPOC communities
Mm.
is, we've known that it's the number one thing that comes up. So what does accessibility look like? Because I think there's also a big difference between saying, oh my God, it's so expensive. And, just like, it's kind of a cop out versus like, can I actually not afford it? Because there's many of us who don't have the concept of, we're not taught it, so it's not anyone's fault. We're not taught the concept of, I need to invest in my mental health. So what does that look like? Because I'm so quick to drop, I'm Indian, so very quick to drop $400 on a dress that I have to wear to a wedding of like 5 events. So I'll be quick to drop hundreds of dollars on wedding clothes. But if you were to ask me every month consistently to, set aside $300, I would be like, wait, for what? Why? I'd question it more. But I wouldn't question the wedding clothes, not for a second, the way I was raised. And I know many South Asian women can relate to what I just said. And so really it was a concept of like, okay, honing in on like, do you actually think you can't afford it? Which is fine, no problem. Or do you feel as though it's just very quick to be like, well, it's so expensive. Who's got the money for that?
It's not a priority.
It's not a priority. So really it's shifting the thinking in terms of what comes up for you. A lot of it also is fear related, which is like, it's easy for me to say, hey, I can't really afford it. But if you think about it, it's, I'm too scared to start the work because I
Right.
think
It's
that,
taboo. Who will find out? Do I really want to go that deep?
and also like, I don't want to deal with that myself. It's just, I've been avoiding it for all my
Mhm.
life. So where do I
Right.
start? What do I do? And so I
Right.
think there's such a huge like barrier there. People are just not aware of it because again, it's not taught. It's not,
Right.
reflected upon in certain spaces. It's very much, we go by the finish school early, get rich fast, buy your house, buy this, get married, have your kids. Like, we've got a blueprint. And so really to be able to like kind of change that blueprint is a lot of work. And so that's what we're doing at Lena, to be able to identify all the barriers that are there and to be able to start targeting those barriers to say, hey, listen, the conversation needs to change. Because one thing that comes up a lot these days, especially, everybody loves mental health. It's like the hottest thing these days.
Right.
You ask them, have you seen a therapist? Oh, yeah, no, I'm good. I don't need it. But listen, I'm here and I'm fully in support of the work that's done and I
Right.
advocate for everybody to go. But me, no, I can figure it out. I'm good. That's
Yeah.
a weird
Yeah.
conversation that comes up.
Right, right, right. And it's like, I'm not broken, but it's like, well, you don't quite have to be broken in order to invest in that. I would say that probably one of the biggest barriers, and I think that like probably one of the reasons that social media does help people in your field is one of the biggest barriers is, ultimately you're investing in a relationship with your clinician. And there are people who understand you and people who don't, right? So it's like you would not open up to any friend. Typically, you choose your friends because they receive the information that you want to give in a way that resonates with you. And I think that's a struggle that people have with therapy too, because you can end up with a bad therapist. You're $200 poorer for the day, and you're like, this sucked. Like, I feel like this didn't really kind of satisfy my needs. Whereas when somebody sees your content, they're like, okay, like this makes sense. Like, I like the way she thinks about things.
Yeah.
How do you think about that? To me is probably one of the bigger, not biggest, one of the bigger barriers to entry in therapy is like if people knew the first time they went on a date with somebody they were going to marry them, a lot more people to go on dates, right? It's like similar to that.
Yeah. I think there's a very big concept of scarcity mindset, as in like, but what if it doesn't work out? Did I just lose $200? In the grand scheme of things, is $200 really going to impact you? Because if you do take that time to invest in really getting to know a therapist, yes, sure, 200, it sucks. Nobody wants to lose any money. Forget 200. I don't even want to lose $10, to be honest with you, right? Nobody likes that. But if you think about big picture over here, there's a cost of everything. There's a tax you pay on every single thing in life. It doesn't matter what the situation is, there's always a tax. So if you're spending that time and investing in getting to know someone and you're like, this is a good fit, and the substantial changes that are going to come at the end of the day, ask yourself, is that $200 really that big a deal? It is big, but will it break the bank? Is it something that's going to really, spiral you in a direction where there's like, oh my God, there's no coming back? Most people will say no, it's not. So I think, again, it's like the perspective of like, oh my God, this is it. Like that scarcity mindset of like, no, I can't. It's just not been good. It's also very taxing emotionally because you're just like, oh my God, I have so much work to do. I opened something up, didn't really work out. It wasn't a good fit. And so I don't, it's, forget it. I'm not going to bother. And again, because it's so emotionally taxing, I understand why people don't want to do it. But same thing with dating, right? You gave me that example. That's taxing too, because you have to keep putting in the work to see if somebody's a good fit or not. And then you think, oh, wait, great fit. I found somebody. I'm done.
Right.
Only to
But most of the time that's not the case. Yeah.
exactly. That is the biggest scam story because you're just like,
Right.
I thought I was done. Why am I doing even more work in a
Right.
relationship? And so I think
Right.
that's a misconception of like, this is it. Do this, check it off. You're good. But you're never good. It doesn't stop. It
No.
just doesn't ever stop.
And I mean, I think, as a woman, I've definitely had many girlfriends who I've had conversations with where they're sure something isn't working out with somebody they're pursuing. And I'm like, come on, like cut your losses. And you realize like, really, they just don't want to go back to square one. They're like mostly in agreement. This is not a good decision, but they're like, oh, like the idea of going back to it and figuring out starting point and like looking for somebody who there's mutual agreement that there's some sort of attraction or aligned values with is just like exhausting. So I think it's pretty similar. I do think that social media is a hidden gem in therapy. Like I do think that when people get the opportunity to see somebody communicate, like it's funny because like for me, I wouldn't say mental health is like something that is, if you were to ask me when Pinterest asks you what are your 5 interests to set up an algorithm, like mental health is not one of them.
Yeah.
That said, I probably follow like 40 mental health people on TikTok now that I think, and I like follow them like, oh, like this is
Yeah.
super interesting. So
Yeah.
like all the rage now is secure attachments, right? I think that like Enneagrams was all the rage a year or two ago. And I'm totally like following these, self-awareness / like mental health shticks. The 5 love languages came and it left, but now it's coming back. There are 2 more love languages. Finally, one that actually reflects me, by the way, because none of them did, experiences. I'm like, yes, that is my love language. Like I want to jump out of a plane with somebody. Like that's cool to me. But actually no, I've jumped out of a plane before. It sucked, but you get the gist, right? And so it's I think that that does become a useful tool in helping people resonate and identify with your framing of the world. Because I'm curious if you would agree with this statement, but a lot of mental health is kind of helping, not a lot of mental health, some mental health is helping people frame things
Mm.
in a way that helps them either make sense of it or realize there's an opportunity and need for improvement.
Yeah. So, I'm a firm believer that you will rarely find me say something like this is 100% amazing, because I'm a firm believer everything has its pros and cons. So yes, mental health accounts are great because they give you awareness, but the problem is there's so much context that's required in mental health, like so much context.
Yeah, we're all ADHD now because of TikTok.
You know what?
Literally, like
Yeah, literally every
7 out of 10 people on TikTok think they have ADHD because that TikTok is algorithm is wild.
yeah, someone's cat is one step away from going on that person's ADHD medication. It's so true.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
what's happening is you're finding the balance between the hook. How do I say something that's like in bite-sized portions and also try to convey the meaning? And 99.9% of the time, you are not going to. Most recently I had talked about, somebody asked me a question, what advice would you give somebody in their 20s? And so I said, this is going to be controversial, but don't listen to your parents. When you're in your 20s, don't listen to your parents. Take the risk. That's when you learn life lessons. So then I got a follow up message saying, a friend of mine, her daughter is in her teens and she's talking to somebody and it's very inappropriate. And so in my mind, I was like, oh, I didn't even think of something like this, as in, like, when I said something like that, my assumption was like, take risks that are going to teach you life lessons. Don't take risks that are unsafe and literally a risk to your well being in life. So, and then I went and I did a follow up story to be like, there's a difference between taking a risk that's going to teach you something versus like an unsafe, unhealthy, problematic behavior. Those are two very different types of risks. So then when you take something at face value that you've seen in like a 60-second soundbite or 30-second soundbite, it's very quickly to not misunderstand it. Also within a community who doesn't have a lot of insight and perspective in this world. So it's very problematic almost, I would say. And that's a con to it. Another con is many of us, which I'm seeing now, are quick to learn these terms and weaponize these terms to be like, well,
right.
you're gaslighting.
Gaslighting. How did I know that's where you were going?
Because it's the one that's thrown everywhere, right? It's like, no, it's not gaslighting. Some
Love bombing.
to have a different perspective, relax and sit down. Not everything has to be labeled as something. I'm quick to say that, and I'm very quick to call folks out to be like, do you even know what you're talking about? Because honestly, it sounds like a bunch of bullshit that you've just learned online. So
Yeah.
before you target somebody or you say something or you jump into like cancel culture for something else, educate yourself and make an informed decision. So I think that's where the cons are. Uh,
Yeah.
that's why it's a little bit tricky. And being like a mental health content creator and a provider, I guess I'm quick to look at the cons before I look at the pros, because
I think that's the right way. Honestly, I think it's the right way because I'm a very, very, very firm believer that if you give a kid a label, they will fill it. I'm talking mostly about children. Like, I believe this wholeheartedly, right? If you tell a kid they are something, they will live up to it. I tell my daughter Camila all the time. She's 4. I'm like, you're a genius. You're a genius. That's such an intelligent way to think about things. What a great idea. And she'll be like, Mom, I'm a genius. Does she know what genius means? She's 4. Like, it's highly likely she has no clue what a genius is. But, like, if I say it enough, she'll believe it. And I really do believe she's very smart, Camila of the future, if you're listening. And so, like, I think that another con is, you have a lot of young kids who are like, okay, I'm this thing. And this thing is fine. This thing is a thing. It's a thing that there's,
yeah,
people treat and they diagnose and they work with. But there's sometimes just not a thing. And maybe you're not facing the realities and the challenges of life, which we all need to be equipped to deal with.
yeah,
And you're just, maybe afraid to deal with that thing. And so you're having reactions and symptoms, and that's fine. And so, like, I think that's a little scary too, because I'm really truly a firm believer that if you tell a kid there's something, they'll believe it.
yeah,
There's like this quote by somebody famous. It's like, if you don't tell the world what you are, it will tell you who you are.
yeah.
And I believe that 100%.
Yeah, I actually talked about it in one of my most recent videos. Uh,
Maybe that's where I found that.
yeah,
Maybe you should tell me, because I definitely picked it up on social media. But
it was
somebody
Carl
famous,
Jung who said it.
that is
Yeah.
so funny. 100% Carl Jung. 100% I took that from your content, and I'm replaying it as if I made it up. That is hysterical. At least I credited him and didn't pretend like I made it up. Good thing I have a good moral compass.
Which again, like, that's what it comes down to, right? Like, what you just did right now, is it not the most human thing to do? Of course it is. And so I think, like, folks are so quick to discredit somebody, to be like, well, she's stealing this or he's doing this. Like, no, just let them be human. Let them have a human moment. It's okay. Not everything needs to be attacked so quickly. Not everything needs to be labeled so quickly, especially when you don't even recognize or understand the depth of what that term even means or that label even means. And here we go, living example.
Right. 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 Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, no, but I think about this a lot now that I'm like, a parent of children. Another thing I think about a lot is my relationship with mistakes
Mhm.
and how I communicate mistakes to my kids. And not because I want them to think I'm faulty, which I am, and they need to know that, but mostly because I want them to know other adults are faulty.
Yeah.
Like it's not, I'm their mother, but I also fall in a genre, and the genre is like adults, and they're gonna meet a lot of adults with really bad ideas, and they should know that,
Yeah.
right? Like just because somebody older than you says it doesn't mean it's true. You need to like learn your critical thinking skills, and so that's a whole other genre of TikTok, which is funny because again, it's blurry, right? Like
Yeah.
then I leave the psychiatry and psychology and therapy
Yeah.
space, and suddenly I'm in like the wise mom
Yeah.
space, and there's a lot of wisdom that ought to be exercised on the internet. To go
There
back to
is,
the immediate
and there's
point.
a lot of wisdom to what you said, because like BIPOC communities, what is like, there's God's word, and then there's your parents. You don't question it, you don't challenge it, and there's so much guilt that comes up from it. Like, I'm not listening to what they're saying, even though I know it's not right. I can't. So what you're teaching your parents, really, it's so important and pivotal, because it's like, you're okay. It's okay to disagree with your mother. It's fine, no problem, right? And frankly, I'm not a mom, but if I had kids, I'd be pissed on the surface, but in the back, I'll be so happy if my kid
Yeah.
to like fight back. I'd be like, yeah, you're gonna be okay. When I die, you're gonna be just fine, kid. Although, on the surface, I'd be like, that's a you're grounded. The amount of trouble you're
Yeah.
in, it's, so I would say that, but honestly, my heart would be just bursting with joy to be like,
Yeah.
good for you to push back, good for you to, advocate for yourself. I love nothing more than that. One thing I often tell clients, it's, are you expecting your parent to be perfect? No, actually, if all of us had a moment where we heard our parents say, thinking back when you were in grade 12, or when you were so and so, I did this and this, and I screwed up. I shouldn't have done that. The amount of tears that are just gushing saying something like
Mm.
that, because people think about it, it's the idea of humanizing somebody. It's like your parent is just humanizing themselves. Instead of saying, I'm right, you're wrong, I know everything, you have to listen to me, you're saying, no, you're approaching it in a very dignified manner, where you're humanizing them, and you're saying, you were right, I shouldn't have done that, it was wrong of me.
Yeah.
And as soon as the
Right.
child hears that, you could be 40 and you will instantly soften and forgive your parent, just because they've humanized that experience.
I fully, not only do I fully agree and believe that and agree with it. It's funny enough. I was in the car with my mom a few days ago, and she was talking about something. She's like, that was a mistake, and she kind of like walked through it. And it wasn't even a relationship to me. It was kind of a bit bigger than me. And just hearing her walk through that was so fascinating, because my mom is a very capable, very confident, very intelligent woman. And I was like, man, like this is wild to kind of take the broader lessons and watch my mom, who most of the time is right, by the way. Like I wouldn't say that she's generally wrong. She's often right. Like I see her take such open accountability, but also play back how she wishes she would have done it. And I know the intention. She wasn't trying to like shoot the ish and kill time. Like ultimately she wanted me to learn something, right? Now I'm a mom, like I'm a woman. I have a family and all these things. And so it's pretty fascinating to watch. And I think that it's exciting, though, that we also have people in our community, to your earlier point, who are able to talk about these things with our languages, so on and so forth. Like I remember once we were talking to a lady who, she was like somebody I just randomly met, I think at the park or something,
Mhm.
and she was in psychotherapy. And I was telling her about an experience. She's like, "Yeah, that's pretty common in your culture, though, right? Like women aren't respected."
You're like, you
It's
nailed
like,
it. How'd you know?
literally, my I just kind of like, I think the way that I looked at her, she probably thought she uncovered a trauma. She could like was too like much of an Orientalist to realize that I was so baffled and shocked, and in shock by what she'd said.
Yeah.
She's like, "Yeah, like, I know that's pretty common with your community." And I was like, "How many times do people speak to folks who are meant to validate their life experiences that are turned in the wrong direction and creating kind of new beliefs that are inaccurate,
Yeah.
right?"
Yeah.
It's like, no, honey, that's not common in my community. But my favorite question, I did a TikTok about this. My favorite question in the whole wide world when there's a microaggression is, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And you just keep asking, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? And you'll just see somebody's face turn red. So if she asks me again, if I run into her at, the La Brea tar pits again, I know what to say.
That's funny. Also, I
Mm.
love seeing people in awkward, uncomfortable situations. So I'm probably, well, not probably, I do the exact same thing. I'm like, oh, what's that about? I don't know. Never. Go on. Tell me a little bit more. I love it. It's so uncomfortable and awkward.
But it brings the truth out, right? It brings the truth out.
Yeah, it is true.
Mm. Oh, you watched Aladdin, so you think Arab men are crazy? Yeah, no. Of a certain type? Nope. Yeah, I almost said crazy. I know we're not allowed to say that anymore. I'm talking to a psychotherapist, so I take
Well,
accountability for that.
that's another thing, right? The hypersensitivity around literally anything. These days, I'm just like, I don't
Everything.
know what I can say and can't say. And I think a lot of people relate to that.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, as you kind of are, first of all, tell me about Lena. What's the launch been like, and what does the next 5 years of Lena look like for you? What's ideal? People who are listening, what do you want them to learn from it or take from it?
Yeah. So Lena's launch has been, frankly, struggle so far. So when
I
you
mean, it's a tech company. Whether or not you're a psychotherapist, like I'm in technology, it's not easy what you're doing.
you know, the one thing I will say, just to kind of push back on what you just said, I wouldn't call it a tech company. It is a mental health company. So a tech company, I believe, is, you know, their intention is like really investment in the technology and really building out the technology. And, you know, I don't think there's as big of an emphasis and focus on the quality of the clinical care, because really they're just looking for, I guess, the data that's coming there, how many people they're
Revenue.
onboarded, right? And so over here, I wouldn't call ourselves Lena a tech company.
You're a mental health company enabled by technology.
I would call it a mental health platform, yeah, because the idea is that we are building out our clinical teams in every single province. And what the next 5 years really looks like for Lena is, I would say, we've collaborated on multiple levels with communities in those provinces. So that can look like whether you're providing it's like direct to consumer, directly to clients, to corporations, and also not-for-profit organizations, and also government. So depending on the community you're providing services to, for example, Indigenous communities, we're going to be doing a direct collaboration with the government to provide services specifically to those heavily traumatized companies that are, or not companies, organizations, communities, my God, Indigenous communities that are very often in remote areas. So multiple layers of collaborations to provide services so we can have accessibility in these spaces and services as well. Because again, for folks who are able to pay directly, amazing, great. For folks who aren't able to pay, what other avenues can you go through? Well, so and so clinic actually did receive X amount of funding. You know what? Connect with them and they'll go ahead and make a referral and we can service you that way. So to be able
Yeah.
to like find the layered ways of understanding the barriers and really contributing to them, I would love nothing more than to see that.
No, it's fantastic. It's like I have this really cool wagon, and yesterday I was in like a Facebook group about this wagon. I'm committed to this wagon, and there's a woman with a child who has who's not able bodied, and she like put a post up as a PSA, and she's like, hey, this like random insurance company or this random whatever will like expense it to insurance in the middle of the country, and all these parents with kids who are immobile were like, oh my gosh, like I can expense this wagon, and it's totally this hack that like nobody would know, but it's like fantastic. It's apparently a really great wagon because it's so bulky for a kid who needs to carry around like IV drips or
Yeah.
medical stuff, oxygen. So I was like, whoa, like these resources are so you only know if you find out from somebody else.
Yeah, and right now
So I
we
think it's
don't
cool.
have like a central place for folks to go to. So even for somebody who's like, listen, I got the money. I have unlimited amounts of cash. I will pay. Where do I go? I don't know. So that really is missing. I think in the States, BetterHelp and Talkspace is there. And I mean, there's a lot of feedback on those that are not so great because I think, again, BetterHelp is, from what I know, is a tech company, which comes with a whole bunch of different problems. But
Revenue. That's the only problem for tech companies. There's one goal, it's revenue. But anyways, carry on.
so in terms of clinical care, we're very different that way. So what happens is when people don't know where to go, they're just like, they feel lost and they feel helpless. So it's like, money's not the problem. This is not the problem. That's not the problem. The problem is I don't know where to go, who to speak to, who do I find? And so really that's the goal at Lena. We will provide, like, the reason why we're developing the technology to be able to do it is really to enhance the access. Because right now the technology we have is very clunky and it doesn't give a very optimized experience for the patient or client who is accessing care. And frankly, when you're having a hard time and the experience is clunky, you don't want to have more mental load to be able to be like, okay, wait, where was it supposed to go? Where was the email coming? What
Right.
is this? Like, how does that work? I don't know. Just to really optimize that, we needed to create like a custom platform to be able to do that. So yes, we've got new technology. we have a big tech investment that we've made, but that is not, I wouldn't say, is the main
That's
selling
not the
point.
core.
It's not the core
Yeah.
at all. It's just
I,
a conduit
I
to be able to provide the core product.
so if I'm in Canada today and I want a service, I would download Lena.
You will go to hellolena.com because right now our starting has been a bit of a struggle, so we don't have our technology in place yet. But inshallah, in a couple of weeks, we will be coming up. So we're launching with the website first, with our custom platform, and then the app will follow very shortly, inshallah.
That's fantastic. And how about my American listeners?
American listeners, so depending on the province that you're in or the state that you're in, psychotherapy can be regulated or not regulated. Now, if it's not regulated, you can actually access services anywhere, which is great. Feel free to go onto hellolena.com and submit a request. But if it is regulated, then you have to, I would say, best place to go is psychologytoday.com. Put in your postal code and you'll have a whole bunch of options. On the left hand side, you'll also see a bunch of filters that are there. So whether that is like a specific issue that you're looking for, a specific religion, somebody who belongs to specific groups, no problem. You can select all of those and they will fine tune it for you.
And what's your are you of the philosophy that everybody should have a therapist? Like, what's your relationship with therapy as a thing?
So I think it's yes and no. I think there's periods of life where folks will need it, and these are stages of life that don't need to be, oh my God, so traumatic. No, no, you know what? I had a baby and I'm struggling a little bit after
Mm.
postpartum. That's very different and that's okay. That's a situational piece. Yes, you might need a little bit more support. Depending on the situation as to what's going on, you will need support. So I think it's one of those things that needs to be in and out, a little bit of a revolving door rather than like you always need one, you need to hold on to one. Frankly, I'd feel a little bit of a fraudster saying something like that because I would feel like, no, I need you to be hooked onto this thing. No, I think it's one of those things where you do need somebody and you have to put in the work to find that good fit. And then it's a bit like a revolving door. You're in and out, periods of time where you need more support, you amp it up. And there's going to be lots of periods of time where you don't need it. Space it out to once every 3 months or space it out to once every 6 months. It doesn't matter if it's just to check in, that's fine too. But really, it comes down to somebody asking themselves, like, am I okay right now? As in, do I need a monthly check in? Do I need a bi-monthly check-in? That's fine too, but it really comes down to you. So I would say yes and no. It's helpful to always have that some person in your pocket, but you don't need to access them all the time.
And what do you think is the bare minimum, even before or mid, or maybe before the therapy journey? What's the bare minimum somebody should understand about themselves, or do you think that they should go to a therapist to help them
So
understand?
yeah, I'm of the belief that you don't need a therapist to ask you these questions because the thing is, if you go to a therapist, you go to a nutritionist, you go to a trainer, they're all going to tell you things you know. So it's not news. I know this. You know this, right? You think a
Mm.
dietitian's going to tell you, yes, smash a donut and a bag of chips in the morning? No, they're going to
Yeah.
eat a wholesome, nutritious diet, right? Same thing when it comes to therapy work as well. They'll ask you
Huh.
certain types of questions and they'll guide you and they'll tailor certain things for you, which is, I find, that's where your money gets cashed in. I know all the things, but how do I make it realistic for me and tailor it to me? Because in the world that we live in, I feel like I want everything. I want to go to Sephora and buy all the beauty products, and I want to go to like the bookshop, buy all the self help books. Am I going to read it? No. Am I going to use the products? No. Why did I just buy a 12-step, $300 skincare routine? And why did I just buy 6 books that I'm not going to access? So that's where you're going to really cash in your therapy, where you're creating realistic, sustainable plans. But to be
Hmm.
able to do the work before you get into that space is asking yourself this big question: what do I want? What do I want out of life? And that starts off with big answers. I want a house. I want to get married. I want kids. You want to get married? Okay, cool. So then we break that down into what is the situation looking like when it comes to relationships? What's the situation looking like when it comes to dating? What's the situation looking like when it comes to your social supports? As in, what are your friendships like? What's the family dynamic like? Then you kind of break into those, right? So asking the big question, what do I want out of my life? Everybody will give you the same answer. I want to be happy. I want to be comfortable. And I want to just, live a life where I'm healthy. But those are big, big, big things. So then break it down into like what's realistic, what's not realistic. Healthy is not enough. What do is there any health concerns? Is there any physical health concerns? What is the gym situation looking like? Do you have a history of working out? Have you played any sports? So really breaking it down. So really the blueprint I think would be asking yourself, what do you want? Because your first session, guess what your therapist is going to ask you? What do you want? Why are you here? Like,
Mm.
well, they'll say it nicer than what I just said, but it's how can I support you? What is it that you're looking for? 90 5% of folks will start off with like, I don't even know where to start. And when they start talking, they feel like it's just a chaos, like they're so tangential. But if you kind of think about it, some very seasoned clinician will be so quick to point it out. They're all connected. It's one after the other, after the other, after the other, and it has a domino effect. The beauty about it is when you start working on one, just like the domino effect, as they all fall down, they all start getting up as well.
Yeah. That's such a good way to put it, because as I think about how medicine is received and how therapy is received, how mental health services are received, they're actually received different in a public level, right? Like in terms of general knowledge.
Yeah.
So general knowledge about medicine, for example, we've all seen the TV shows. You go to a doctor, they fix something. The doctor's goal is to fix something. What's often not on the TV show, or maybe is, not highlighted as much, as the doctor looking at all the labs and kind of trying to understand what is actually wrong in the first place in order for them to go into the operation in ER or whatever it is, right? When we see therapy on TV, it's the therapist drawing out issues. So it's the part you don't see in medicine. It's the therapist being like, look at these two images. Who abused you as a child? You kind of like are more deeply immersed in the fact finding and the issues part, but not the tactical tools of a therapist necessarily saying whatever the equivalent of a surgery is, right? Like, okay, make sure you're doing these things to ensure you have a healthy marriage or healthy relationship with your children. And I think that it actually, what ends up happening is people are left to their own devices to understand what is a shrink, what is therapy. To your point, and I think the point that has to be really clear to everybody is, it is, yes, the identification of issues, sure, the attribution of root cause to those issues, absolutely, but ultimately the goal is tools, right? And it's tools for you to live life in the way that you have intended, in an intentional way. I think a lot about intentionality with kids, because I'm in a very reactive era. But I'm like, wait, are my reactions my intentions? Like, is that the type of kid I want to raise? And I'm constantly taking a step back to think like, what if I can be as intentional as possible, what do I want these kids to end up like? Because you get stuck in the reactivity. So I think that that's like such an important message, and helps frame the importance of understanding how your brain works and why it works that way to the layperson.
I would also say, for folks who feel like that question is very overwhelming, where do I start off with? What do I want in my life? What's my intention? Start with something smaller. Then if that's too big of a question, what do I want right now? And that will actually help you, because then if you're thinking about like, okay, well, if I have to see a therapist, what do I want to say to them? Well, I have these like heart palpitations I keep getting at work, or I'm just so sweaty all the time at work, and I get so anxious about it that like I've removed myself from social situations because I don't want to shake someone's hand because I'm so sweaty, or I feel kind of dizzy and I can't focus. You can start off right there, and you can reverse engineer, because obviously those are just physical manifestations of an underlying mental health concern that are going on.
Right.
And when you're doing the research to figure out like what is a shrink, a lot of it is it comes from what you see on TV, and like you said, TV doesn't give you the full depiction, neither does TikTok or Instagram. So really, I think your best bet is to really put in that work, to do the consults. And maybe it even means you make that initial investment of, sure, I'll pay the $150 and I'll have a session with somebody, because I think the phone consult went okay. And I think that's a message I really, if anybody's listening, I would love for them to hone into, which is, you will always have cost of something. There's always a tax to everything. And so that means that if you're looking to, jump on this trajectory where it's going to be a long-term investment for yourself and it's going to be meaningful, it doesn't mean you're going to hit it right off the bat. Like, you're not going to have a home run the first time, the first session with the first therapist, and it's going to be the best one ever. Just like your first date ever is probably not the person you end up marrying. I think that's right for everybody. So that's something I'd love to hone into.
I think those are beautiful, beautiful parting words. And for people who want to follow your journey, follow Lena, where can they find you?
Go on to hellolena.com and just go ahead and hit the contact us button, and you can always find me there.
Thank you. And what are your handles?
At the POC therapist. No, it's lies. It's at .poc.therapist. And also we've got Hello Lena as well. And you can find me on both of those as well.
Fantastic. I'll be sure to link those in the show notes. Thank you so much. It was amazing chatting, Sada.
Thank you. I'm so glad this happened after so long. So I appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time.